God's adoption agency. George was not a person of faith, nor a person of good character. As a young boy growing up in Germany in the early 1800s, he would often steal money from his own father. As a teenager, he sneaked out of a hotel twice without paying for the room. Once he got caught by the police and thrown in jail for the night. As a Bible college student, George loved going to bars, drinking, gambling, being the life of a party, and living a lascivious lifestyle. He also loved making fun of people, especially Christians. One day, though, George was invited by a friend to go to an off-campus Bible study. He agreed, being excited that he would have new material for making fun of Christians by going to the study. But to his surprise, he ended up liking the Bible study. For the first time, he saw people that really knew and loved God. He began to attend meetings, and he attended each meeting that week. Before the end of the week, he knelt at his bedside and asked God to forgive him for his sins. George's friends saw a change in him immediately. He no longer went to bars. He no longer made fun of people. He spent more time reading his Bible, talking to others about God, and going to church. Soon he found that his friends did not want to be around him anymore. He decided to take his spiritual commitment to another level, and he wanted to become a missionary. He told his father. His father became very upset because he wanted George to have a high-paying job and not be a poor missionary. And he told George that he would not give him any more money for his schooling after that decision. But George knew that he had to do what God was calling him to do, even if his own father didn't want to support him. George went back to college, not knowing how to pay his college tuition. So he did something that he thought might be a bit silly for a grown man to do. But he got on his knees and he asked God to provide for his college tuition. To his great surprise, an hour later, his professor knocked on his door and offered him a job as a tutor. George was amazed. It was the beginning of George Mueller's dependence upon God. George ended up becoming a pastor of a small church in England, and the church wanted to pay him a good salary from the money it received by renting the front rows to all of the rich members. Poorer members had to sit in the back. George told them that in order for him to become their pastor, this practice would have to stop, and he ended up refusing any salary from them. And he committed himself to praying that God would provide for him as he served as a pastor of this small church in London. He trusted God to meet his needs, and God did. George and his family never missed a meal and were always able to pay their rent. But George began to sense that God was calling him to something even greater. Each day, as George would walk the streets of London, he would see children everywhere who had no mother or father. They lived on the streets or in poor state-run houses where they were treated very poorly. George felt that God was calling him to open up an orphanage to take care of these children. George prayed, asking God to provide a building, people to oversee it, furniture, and money for food and clothing for these children. God answered his prayers. Sometimes a wealthy person would send a large amount of money. Sometimes children would just give them a small amount they received as a gift for doing their chores. But many times, food, supplies, or money came at the last minute. But God always provided without George telling anyone about his needs. He just prayed and waited on God. Church, do you know how many children lived in his orphanage? During his lifetime, over 10,000. When each child became old enough to live on his own, George would pray with him and put a Bible in his right hand and a coin in his left, he explained to that young person that if he held on to what was in his right hand, God would always make sure there was something in his left as well. It's been more than 165 years since George took in his first orphan. Yet his vision continues to inspire Christians around the world to take care of those children that don't have parents. So I want to ask you the question this morning: why would God honor this man's apparent lack of following Jesus' advice about if you have a tower to build, count the cost and make a budget? George never did that. And still God blessed. So today we're going to look at Scripture at the first part of the sermon of maybe why God circumvented that bit of advice that Jesus gave us as Christians to count the costs and make up budgets. Why would God do that? We'll look at that. And then at the end, we'll actually talk about something very practical, and we have a couple guests here that are going to help us do that today. So when you start reading Scripture, you realize in Genesis 1, the family is the bedrock of the unit that God created, mother and father. They know each other, quote unquote, and they produce children. They raise that child, they clothe that child, they feed that child, they give instruction to that child, they prepare that child to one day leave their house, go out, find a spouse, and start the said process all over again. But how does God treat it when that process doesn't work? Maybe sometimes when there's a divorce in the family. Maybe sometimes when there's a death. And maybe sometimes when one parent or both parents just decide they can't raise that child and they give it up. How does God treat that? We are not left to guess. In the Old Testament, there are many verses. I just picked a few verses to show you this morning where I hope we get a sense. Today, as Lauren mentioned, we're entering God's heart. We're looking at the heart that God has for the world. When He sits on His throne, His glorious, beautiful throne as the ruler of the universe, what is He thinking? What's He paying attention to? Is He just looking at all the different galaxies created? And, oh, by the way, what's going on there at Earth these days? From the very beginning in Deuteronomy, the Bible tells us that God takes special interest and He defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow and loves the alien, giving him food and clothing. Did you catch the three categories, the demographics of what God pays attention to? Widows, those without a husband in that culture, which was almost a sentence of death if you didn't have some man in your family take care of you. It was an agrarian society. It wasn't like you could go out and go back to school, get another career. You needed someone to take care of you. God understood that. He looked after widows. He also looked after those that didn't have fathers or mothers, children that didn't have a parent to guide them in this process of growing up. And also the aliens, could be an immigrant or a refugee, someone who is having to run from their country, maybe for political reasons, maybe for family reasons. God takes care of those three categories in the book of Deuteronomy. And He makes sure that they have food and clothing, and He cares about them. Psalm 68, verse 5 and 6 says, God is a father to the fatherless, a defender of the widows is God in His holy dwelling. God sets the lonely in families. He leads out the prisoners with singing, but the rebellious live in a sun-scorched land. Again, the Bible is clear. God becomes a parent to those who don't have parents. And He defends widows in a society that is not really geared to take care of them. The Bible doesn't leave it as guesswork as where God is looking, what God is paying attention to. Hosea 14 verse 3 says, for in you the fatherless find compassion. That is the prophets. They realized the character of God was that if someone was parentless, that they would find compassion in the heart of God. This was a class of people that God would not give up. So in the Old Testament, it actually tells us, as believers in Yahweh, the one true God, if we come to God, and if we just come here to church, and you think about it, it's a beautiful church service we have. It's beautiful music. We come and we have nice discussions at Sabbath school class, good social interaction. We have friends and family here that we enjoy spending time with. But if we leave and don't pay attention to what the God that we worshiped on Sabbath morning is doing, it's a danger. Psalm 82, verse 3, should inspire us as believers in Yahweh to defend the cause of the weak and the fatherless, maintain the rights of the poor and the oppressed. That when we leave the temple, when we leave the church and enter the world, if we are a worshiper of Yahweh, this becomes part of our character as well. That when we see the fatherless, when we see the widow, when we see the alien, the refugee, the immigrant, that our heart beats along with the Father, and the Bible tells us, defend their cause. Isaiah 1 verse 17, as Isaiah is telling the Israelites, this is why God is going to send you into Babylon. One of the reasons, he said, you haven't learned how to do right. Learn how to do right. Seek justice. Encourage the oppressed. Defend the cause of the fatherless. Plead the case of the widow. One of the reasons why Israel went into captivity was because their hearts didn't beat with the heart of the Father. He said, you're not like me. Learn how to be like me. Learn how to have your hearts beat with my heart. Learn where to look. Where is that? The oppressed, the fatherless, and the widows. So Jesus came, showed us the character of the Father. What do you think, the New Testament church? Think they just didn't pay attention to the lessons of the Old Testament? Not if you listen to James, the apostle, who's kind of the no-nonsense apostle of like, yeah, you got faith, but show me works too if you have faith. So if you have faith in this God that protects the fatherless, the widows, the aliens, this is what he says. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. I want to take a little time out here, church. I want us to think about this. Because sometimes at church we say, oh, isn't that nice? You got a little ministry for, an orphanage over here, or something for the widows over here. We got a little ministry over here. James tells us, if you want to know that you are standing in the will of God, if you want to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that your religion is pure and faultless, and that God is standing behind you 100%, as he stood behind George Mueller, what should we do? Look after orphans and widows. Could it be that George Mueller disregarded even Jesus' counsel to draw up budgets, to send out lists of what he needed for the orphanages, but God's heart was beating so intensely for the thousands, over 10,000 children on the streets of London, that he worked miracle after miracle, of which I've even heard, I believe here at Markham Woods in our offering call, stories of how God worked in miraculously providing for George Mueller to take care of these children. Could it be a sign to Christians across the spectrum of cultures, across the time, different epochs that we live in? George Mueller lived over 170 years ago in England, a very different culture than we have now. And yet God did miracle after miracle for him. Why? James says that if you want to know you're standing in the will of God, and that with an absolutely clear conscience, sometimes we can doubt about, well, is this God's will for me to do this or that? And we have doubts. Well, I don't know, maybe it's God's will for me to do that. Maybe it's move here, have this job, have this spouse, whatever. There's one thing you know that you never have to doubt about whether it's God's will or not, and that's to take care of orphans and widows. You never have to question it. It's here in the Word of God. You don't have to go, well, let me go in and pray and think about this one. No, God's told us, if you want to see God act in your life, start taking care of people who are oppressed. If you want to see the miraculous powers of God in your life, look after these groups of people. Why? Because that's what God is doing. So it's not just something nice, not just something, a little nice ministry you guys got going on over there, though that's so sweet. It's an essential part of our religion. It's what it means to be a Christian. To take the name of Christ and not be involved in that is defaming His name before the world. It's part of who we are. You know, when the disciples asked Jesus, how should we pray? What two words did Jesus start off with? Our Father. You see, God could have turned His back on this planet. He's got other galaxies. It's just one little tiny speck in His whole universe. And when Adam and Eve sinned, He could have been like, you know what? All right, didn't work out. Let's move on. But He didn't. And He made a way to adopt us back into the family. And if we don't pay attention to other people on this planet that don't have families, about how to get them into either families, foster care, or just taking care of them, we're not really doing what our Father is doing. We're not really with Him. But I like to think of it this way too, because I'm going to go to Isaiah 49. You know, some you might consider more liberal theologians have gone to calling God a woman. And I thought about it this week, you know, referring to God as she and her power. And I thought, you know, theologically, you can make the case for it. Genesis 1 is very clear. When God made mankind in His image, it says it twice. Male and female, He created them. I want you to look at this text from Isaiah 49. God says this, can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she has born? The answer is usually no on that one. I see how mothers take care of their children and always think about their children. But the real answer in then a sinful world is yes, it does happen from time to time. So God says, you know what? Though it may happen, though the mother may forget, I will not forget you. God is the ultimate mother. So I don't want all the women to feel left out here, because the image of God is the male and female. And when we talk about the fatherless, I believe we can include the motherless as well in this. People that need encouragement, need guidance, need clothing, just someone to take care of. And God told humanity, you know what? Your parents may forget you, but I won't. I won't. I'll fight for your rights. I'll fight to clothe you. And when George Mueller kind of disobeys even what my own son said, doesn't have a budget, has no fundraising letters, no list of needs, I will still provide for these kids because I can't forget them. She is great. God is great. Jesus said to His disciples when He left them, He actually uses this analogy. He says, I won't leave you as orphans. I will come to you. Jesus understood that when we become a Christian, when we enter the family of God, when we get baptized into the family of God, we're being baptized into this fantastic worldwide family where we have one Father, one Mother, who will always take care of us. I don't believe it's a coincidence at all. About a year and a half ago, I met first with our mission trip committee here at Markham Woods. Markham Woods, if you're new, has had a history of doing mission trips, usually in Inter-America, South America region. So we adopted 2 countries that we were going to concentrate on because we have large contingents here in Markham Woods. One of them was Puerto Rico. So Clinton is our representative for Puerto Rico. We have many Puerto Rican families, a beautiful country, beautiful people. We wanted to help out and give our youth a place to do mission trips to. Didn't work out this year, but we're planning one next year for all of you youth. The other place was we had a lot of Ukrainians in this congregation. So we adopted Ukraine. This was 1.5 years ago. Before anybody was on anybody's border, before there was any threat of war, before there was any threat of invasion. And we adopted Ukraine as Markham Woods. That's somewhere where we would like to help out. Men of Markham Woods, we were going to go over there here in about 2 months, 3 months to Bucha, where all the atrocities were just committed a few months ago. That's where we were going to go. And now, can you believe it? I don't claim credit for this. I want it very clear. I believe God was at work in this congregation well before I got here. We have a collection of wonderful Ukrainian families here that were part of Markham Woods when I got here. It just happens that my German family used to live in the Ukraine. My wife has family in the Ukraine right now. And I have friends also in Ukraine. But guess what country is getting the most orphans and widows right now of any country in the world? It's Ukraine. Think that's a coincidence after what we just read? We're the family of God. God has called us as an essential part of our religion, of who we are. If we're going to be with God, if our hearts are going to be with His heart, He put us in contact with the one country that is gaining every day, and when I say gaining in a terrible sense of the word, more orphans and more widows. Every day. So I've invited Oleg and Julia Kostyuk, if you guys want to come up here. They just made a trip to Ukraine a couple weeks ago, and they have planned out a trip for us at Markham Woods. So a week from Sunday, we haven't announced this because it's been kind of a whirlwind. We're getting the trip ready. Oleg and Julia have been helping us with I won't steal the thunder. I'll let you guys tell us what you've been doing. But Stacy Robb is going to go. Olena Kutlerova, another pastor from College View Church in Nebraska. They ended up raising a bunch of money at a benefit concert a few weeks ago. Another lay member from here in Orlando, Dan Barrington, and then another lay member that Julia met from Maryland. In a week from Sunday, we are going to going to Ukraine. And first of all, I would like you guys to tell us about your trip, what you saw, and then we'll close off with us telling what we're going to do on our trip.
Yeah, just one. Number one, we wanted to thank Markham Woods Church because your contribution goes a long way. And you cannot even imagine how your contributions make a huge difference there in Ukraine. And when we met with them, they all know Markham Woods Church. People talk about Markham Woods Church because they know that the majority of funds that were actually collected in Florida Conference and also in the United States in general comes from Markham Woods Church. So what you do is incredible. Thank you. But never stop. Never stop, because what you do actually makes a difference. So what I would like us to do, I would like us to take a look at the map. So what you see on the map right now is actually, it's based on May 10. This is where some of the war is happening. So this is a real war and military presence. Russian military presence is where you see it in yellowish color. So this is number one. And then number two, you also see this little town. Do you see this? It's not a little town, it's a city, Chernivtsi. Chernivtsi, do you see this city? So this is where we crossed the border, right here. We arrived all the way here, and it takes about 8-9 hours to get to this point. So this is what actually Doug and the team, Pastor Doug and the team will have to experience. And that experience is filled with miracles and blessings. So this is what we need to remember. So when you look at the map, it doesn't look that terrible, because it's only 1/5 of the country that is basically occupied. It looks like. But this is what the reality. So this is what the okay. So another slide will tell you the reality.
Yeah.
Because the bombs were actually there land everywhere, everywhere. So because of that situation, look what is happening. According to Reuters, it's a little older information. 6 million people, they actually fled for neighboring countries. 6 million people fled to all these neighboring countries. But according to as of March 18, 6.5 million people, they stayed in this region, which is a relatively safe area. But the reality is the number is significantly higher. So about 10 million people, they are staying still in Ukraine. Many people, they get a significant amount of help in these regions, but very few actually get help here. So that's why, where do we want to focus? People in Ukraine. So if you bring it into perspective, 36% of the population of Ukraine, 44 million, 36%, every third person was displaced. Every third person lost their home. Think about it. And we have actually people who are here who are not at their homes now because they had to leave. They had to leave. So this is how serious the situation is. So that's why our hearts were filled with compassion, just like your hearts, filled with compassion, because we started feeling the pain of other person within our inner organs.
So we had 3 main goals, and these are the goals for the team that's going to be going again next Sunday. The first one is to deliver medical supplies, very important, vital medical supplies. There's huge shortage for insulin, medications, and especially in vulnerable population, which are orphans and elderly. The second goal was to meet with volunteers and support them, and then as well as support the refugees in Ukraine. Again, the people who are most vulnerable are hurting the most. So these are children who have no parents. They have nowhere to go. So one of the most incredible experiences was traveling to a camp that you will get to travel to. So these are some of the pictures of how we left with the 7 suitcases. We met with the doctors in Ukraine, more doctors in Ukraine. These are Adventist clinics that are now serving all the population for free, completely free of charge, because people are desperate. There's lack of healthcare, there's lack of medications. You can see this is a medical clinic. You will get to visit there. They are desperate in things such as insulin, such as aspirin, antibiotics, blood pressure medications, things that we need every day on a daily basis to sustain life. So you can see elderly who received medications. This man was very happy. He got 1 pen of insulin. They're having to ration everything because of the shortages. We also supported and met and supported the volunteers. A lot of people right now are volunteering. Everyone is united. Just like your church made such a huge difference in Ukraine. In Ukraine, people are united in prayer, united in helping each other. Every home has become a refugee place. Every church has mattresses in every single room where people are staying, where kids are staying. Every school has been turned into a refugee site.
And yes, and what is very critical and very important is when we think about refugees, these are people, women with children without a father. So those people who cross the border, these are women with children, but they're fatherless because their father is back in Ukraine. So when we talk about orphans, every single family now experiences what the Bible calls us to do. Are we willing to actually pray to the Father? And just remember, He is the Father, our Father, but their Father as well. And are we willing to become the fathers for those around us? And this is just very powerful example. So this lady's name is actually Tonya. So Julia, could you tell us?
Sure. So when the war broke out, there were a lot of orphans that were in eastern Ukraine, southern Ukraine. They were being evacuated. Many of these children spent nights in bomb shelters. So our Adventist camp, called Your Camp, which is about 1 hour from Chernivtsi, took in 140 orphans. And Markham Woods Church helped pay for the evacuations of those orphans. We got to go and visit with them and spend the time with them, and you will get to see them and be with those children. So when they got to the camp, there was this young girl, her name is Tonya. She's a pediatric resident. She lost the ability to continue to study because the war began. She just got married 3 months ago. When she heard about these orphans, she said, I am going to go and help. I feel God is calling me. She's been volunteering for 2 months, and when you go, you'll meet her. Living there by herself because her husband's in the city trying to work, sleeping in the bunk bed completely for free to support and take care of these orphans.
But what is unique, she just got married 3 months before we came there. So she was married for 3 months, and then now she volunteers for the rest of those 2 months. So just think about it, how people are dedicated. And the reality is those volunteers, they get tired because they're human beings. And when God gave us the commandment, feed my sheep, sometimes you get tired. So that's why unending support, our support, of like emotional support, prayer support, financial support makes a huge difference. Just very quick story about what we saw. I'm probably taking too much time, and you're like, okay, just get done. We're hungry. I know, we all are, but these people also. So when we were crossing the border, we stood there and we were drinking some tea and whatever drinks they were offering. And then we met this group of people from Britain. So we started talking about what they do, what we do, and they said, what we do, we come to Romania and we bring school in a bag supplies, which is basically a huge school bag filled with multiple supplies that kids like, bottles, everything, crafts. So, and they say, we cannot go to Ukraine. So what we do, we drop them off and just deliver it to people who already crossed the border. And we said, hallelujah, because we know the way how you can transport those. So, and we have more children that you can supply those, like that you can have those bags. So we talked to them when we were driving to the airport. We were talking to them. 2 days later, 180 bags were delivered to this camp. And 4 days later, so the gentleman called me and he said, you know what, we left 700 more bags in the storage in Romania, so you can ask your Romanian and Ukrainian pastors to come and pick them up and take them to Ukraine, wherever you want them. So this is how God works.
Truly, it's just incredible. We witnessed so many miracles. We could spend hours here speaking about them, but we just want you to know that you are making a difference. Each one of us can make a difference. These are some of the orphans that we got to meet and talk with. They are such lovely children, so excited that someone actually cares, that someone came to be with them. This is a basement of a family where they actually hide while there are explosions or if there are any sirens. This is one of the sweetest little orphans we met, and she was saying, can we call you mommy and daddy? They are so desperate to feel loved, to feel cared for. And more orphans, and when you go, you'll get to meet them. But it is such an incredible experience because you see God leading, and even in the most painful situations, God opens the door and helps to take care of them because He is their Father.
Just final story. So this little girl, when we actually came to have dinner, so we saw this huge crowd of young adults. You see, they're incredible. The reason why I call them young adults, because they experienced what people are not supposed to experience at that age. Because when I talk to a 12-year-old boy, whose name is Michael, I realized that I have no idea how this world functions. He's much older than me because he's experienced suffering that I've never even thought could possibly happen to a human being. And these kids, and we realized that our hearts were broken when we were there. So when we came to this dinner table, then we saw this little girl, and she grabbed the hand of the director. His name is Igor, director of the camp, and she said, "Can I call you Daddy?" And he said, "Of course you can call me Daddy." And then everyone started calling him Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. This is how we long to be with our Father. So I want you to live with just one word: compassion. Because this is what Jesus taught us. He said, you know what? Of all things, I want you to experience movement within your inner organs. Do we feel compassion? Orphans, widows, those who are in pain. So let's be compassionate. Let's be compassionate presence here, there, and everywhere until He comes.
Amen. Before you go, so Julia, you mentioned taking medications. We're raising money for medications. We still will take donations through the website this week. Is there anything else that we could take in our suitcases? You talked about maybe something for the children. Do you want to just tell a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So when you will enter Ukraine, you will see that you're going to visit some refugee sites, you will visit the clinic, and you will visit the orphanage. And one of the most important things, as I mentioned, is medications. And if any of you want to help, it would be so appreciated. They're lacking aspirin. They're lacking bandages when there's bleeding or sores and things like that. They're lacking children's Tylenol, children's ibuprofen. You'll be going directly to the orphanage. These are all things they can use right there, right now. They're lacking vitamins. There's not enough vitamins for the children. There's not enough vitamins for the elderly. Calcium, vitamin D, fish oil, things that we think about, that we take every day to stay healthy. Those are all very important. Tourniquets to help stop bleeding, because sometimes things happen and there's just lack in the country. So aspirin is a really big one that they had been asking for. And there's also some prescription medications that we're going to be reaching out for help as well, so you can take them. But the other thing I was thinking is maybe some crafts things that you can sit down and do with a child, that you give them your attention. So maybe small kits of crafts, stickers, notebooks, pens to write, crayons. Those are all things that they desperately need.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure everybody kind of has a picture. We have 12 suitcases checked in with our tickets, but we'll take more if we can. So this week we are collecting items. If any of you want to drop some off at the church, on the church website, like I said, you can, if you just want to give money, that's fine too. We will be buying medications this week, packing those suitcases as tight as we can, up to right at 50 pounds per suitcase, and then hauling them all the way there by God's grace. I want us to thank again Julia and Oleg. Thank you.